afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Babies with Knives. This afternoon, we're going to be doing a bit of a system roundtable and discussion with the creators of Magical Land of Yeld, Jake Richmond and Nick Smith. This is a game that you guys will find in the description of this video, where we have a character creation session for you to see, an actual play, and there's even going to be a link for another actual play that we did 2 hours that started all of us on getting all this rolling. So why don't we start with the fact that one of you was going to explain a little bit about the crash course of the engine.
Yeah, totally. So Magical Land of Yeld uses its own engine, very unique. It is made to be simple, especially because we want children to be able to play as well. The mechanics of the game all revolve around six-sided dice. You won't be using anything else, but you might be using quite a few of them. For players, what you'll find is that as a character, you're going to have a strong stat, a tough stat, a smart, and a brave stat. And you're going to use one of those anytime you would, be faced with a challenge and you need to roll some dice. So it's very simple, very easy to use. The mechanics you'll see if you take a look at our video stream pretty well from combat to other challenges. And our combat system, of course, uses a grid, an 8x8 grid, and a special action chain that is definitely worth checking out if you're interested.
Let's give a quick example, Nick. If we were going to have a fight, if I was playing a witch and I was going to attack your monster, what I would do is I would take a number of dice equal to my strong stat. So if I had a strong of 3, I would take 3 six-sided dice. And then I would look at what kind of weapon I had. For example, if I had a sword, and the sword also had 2 strong dice, I would add 2 strong dice to that, so that would give me a total of 5 dice. And then if I wanted to use my sword alongside some special dice, for example, some break special dice, and I had 2 of those, I would end up with a total of 7 dice that I would roll against your monster. And then your monster would roll its tough dice and its armor dice. And we just compare the number to see who wins. But because I'm using my break dice for that attack instead of just doing a normal attack, I would be able to break your armor instead of inflicting damage. Stacking your dice and building your dice pool up to create certain effects.
That's right. And similarly, how you would interact with other types of challenges that aren't combat, you would find maybe you're trying to climb a tree. So again, you would use your strong dice and add a special dice like climb to that check, rolling all of those together and trying to beat the GM, who is also rolling dice against you based off of a challenge that they've set.
And that's a good point. This is an opposed roll system. And from what I understand, it isn't just that you're opposing one character to another necessarily, like a lot of systems are, that you're only opposing another person. But in this game, you set a challenge level for it, and the GM at that point has a number of dice that he will roll. Is that correct?
Yeah, right. When you start your adventure, so one of the things we do is when we start an adventure, the players get to choose how difficult the adventure is going to be. And we have 3 difficulties ranging from very easy to absolutely deadly. And that determines how tough the monsters will be, how many challenge dice the game master can roll against you, as well as what kind of rewards you get. So if you take on a really dangerous adventure, you're going to get a lot of rewards. Whereas if you take on a really easy adventure, you might get more minimal rewards.
But again, this affects the challenges of everything you would be doing. So, of course, if you want a more laid-back adventure where the challenges are much easier and the monsters are pushovers, then you can happily do that as a group if that's what you want.
And that's great for stuff like if you feel like you don't really want to fight monsters this adventure, but instead you want to go shopping, and maybe you want to have some conflicts where you're trying to, trick the shopkeeper into giving you a good discount, or you're trying to rob the local shop or something like that. That's a great low-level, easy adventure. Whereas if you want all the treasure, and you really want to, take on a big boss monster and rob them of everything they have and get a lot of rewards, you're going to go for a really deadly adventure instead.
What if you wanted to be in an Iron Chef competition?
Iron Chef in a gladiatorial arena.
Well, I mean, you can totally scale that. And, of course, that's a reference to the game we just played.
Yes.
You can totally scale that. You can make that a deadly adventure where the stakes are death if you're not able to win this cook-off, or it can be really low stakes and much easier where it's more about role-playing and you're not as worried about what kind of dice rolls you're going to make.
Awesome.
Well, we like that kind of flexibility.
I like it too, and I like that the opposed role, it makes it a little easier on the GM because a lot of times the GM has to stat every single little thing out and know exactly how, at that point, know what to oppose with. But here you're just like, this is going to be a moderate challenge. This is how many dice I roll. I don't need to worry about having every single bit of minutia statted out, which I think is going to be a lot easier on some GMs, well, many GMs.
I think so too.
And it's definitely meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry,
go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, okay. What I was going to
Yeah.
say is I'm a really lazy game master, where Nick tends to be more of a prepared game master. So when it's my turn to run the games, and Yeld uses a rotating game master. So, for example, one session Nick will be the game master. The next session you might be the game master. The next session I might be the game master. When it's my turn, I don't like to spend a lot of time building monsters, and I don't like to spend a lot of time planning out intricate details. So instead, I might grab a few random monsters from our monster section, and I might say to myself, I want to do an easy adventure where it's mostly going to rely on face-to-face rolls between myself as the game master and the players, and that's nice and easy, and I can just rely on my imagination. But to really build much more intricate adventures where you plan out the monsters and you build them from scratch, and you build more intricate conflicts that require more thought and more puzzle solving and stuff like that. So we wanted to make sure that as a game master, you have a lot of tools, and some of those you can completely ignore if you want, but some of them you can really dig into to give a really in-depth experience to your players.
Very cool. Now that brings up an interesting question, because I have tried sharing the GM role with some people, and a lot of times it's more miss than hit when you're trying to co-GM a game. You have to really be in sync. So apparently your game has an actual mechanic for sharing the GM burden. So I'd like to hear more about that, so that the next GM isn't just screwing over the first GM storyline.
Sure.
Well, I think a big part of that, of course, comes down to, how you choose to cooperate and how your story is told.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we kind of take with Yeld is to treat it in the way that you might treat a video game, or that you might treat a cartoon show, right? And so, yes, you have an ongoing plot, and of course that ongoing plot is to get out of Yeld, right? You are children, you're trapped there, you need to escape, right? But in between that, there's festivals to enjoy, there's, ghosts to hunt, there's kings to meet, and so these narratives can be a little less structured in the way that, maybe the last person wanted to do a whole story about, collecting one of the keys that is going to get you out of Yeld. And then right after that, the next person running the game, says, oh, we're going to have a cooking competition. And the whole stark difference between these things is to sort of, emulate that kind of, the episodic nature of, your classic kids cartoon, right?
Yeah, we want you to think of Yeld as something like Avatar: The Last Airbender or Inuyasha, where it's episodic, where some adventures are the big peak season ender adventures, but a lot of them are filler episodes as well, and those are great for building character and stuff like that. To do the shared GM, you really have to come to terms with each other and decide that you're not going to spend time screwing each other over and undermining your stories. One of the things we really like to say, and we mentioned this in the rule book several times, is Yeld is about the stories we build together. Our adventures in Yeld are a story that we share and we create. And when we do that, we create a better story together than we do separately. And sometimes we have to remind each other of that. Sometimes we have to, at the beginning of every episode, we have to say, listen, direction last time, I want to explore a different direction now. Is everybody okay with this? And sometimes people will say, well, actually, I was planning something really cool. And then you can talk about it, and you can kind of figure that out as a group. And I feel like that is, a good tool for any role-playing game.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
And it's something as role players we sometimes get frustrated with, and we sometimes forget that we're telling a story as a group, even if we just have a single GM.
Well,
the other thing is, of course, that while we have a rotating GM in Yeld, we know a lot of players are just going to decide to have one game master. Fine as well.
now is this game?
Yeah, I like the idea that, maybe somebody will come and back you up. And we've done that in some campaigns that we've done, just, had a guest GM and then the GM gets to play. And it's brilliant. It's, and some of our best stories actually have come from that. So I think that's a great thing to build in.
Yes.
Yeah, and it really depends on the group and what your preferences are. We encourage everybody to try it, and we recognize not everybody is going to love it.
I totally get that. Since we're already talking about the 7 keys and adventure progression, can you go a little into that a little bit more for us about the 7 keys and what kind of story elements are designed for this game?
Nick,
Certainly.
yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
so starting from the beginning, kind of where we start, you are a group of children from our world. They are between the ages of 7 and 12, and they have found a magical door that leads to a strange land called Yeld. And in Yeld, they go on adventures, they collect treasure, they have fun with monsters, and they're having, generally a good time. But one time they try and come back from the door, and they realize it's locked, and they've now been trapped in Yeld. And so they find out that they have to give up their childhood and become heroes in order to collect 7 keys that will reopen their door and let them go home. But the danger of all of this is that they have to do this before they turn 13, because when they turn 13, they slowly start becoming monsters in Yeld, and they'll be trapped there forever.
Yeah.
So the game is a race against time, and it has sort of a classic, let's say, Legend of Zelda-esque, 7 temples you have to go explore, beat the boss in, and collect a piece of the puzzle that's going to let you get out.
Yeah.
Um,
The 7 keys are held.
The structure
Go
of
ahead.
the hunters is what they're referred to. The 7 hunters of Yeld, each one holding a key, is actually how we determine character progression when it comes to mechanically getting more powerful. That is based on how many keys you've collected so far.
Cool.
So not only is it sort of a narrative mechanic, but it is also a mechanic that represents your sort of powering up over time.
Yeah,
Well,
when you start the game, you're going to be at rank 0 when you first discover the door. And at that time, Yeld seems like a nice and friendly place. And then once the door closes, you move on to rank 1. You choose a heroic job like Shepherd or Oathbreaker or Black Mage. And then that's when you learn that you need to go and hunt down these hunters of Yeld and gather their keys. And once you beat a few hunters, you progress to rank 2, and that unlocks different benefits like advanced jobs and different weapons. You beat a few more, you go to rank 3. You beat a few more, you go to rank 4, and that's when you get to finally challenge the big boss of Yeld, the vampire prince Dragul, who is our classic bad guy. And if you can beat him, you get to open the door and go back home again.
okay.
Well, that's only that has to come to it. One of the things that we had talked about, which I think is a lot of fun, is this big boss at the end. He's completely optional.
That's true.
Basically, how it works is that as long as you've collected your 7 keys and none of you are, older than 12, you can just go home. There's no problem. You've won. But if any of you have turned 13 or are monsters at that point, the only way for those friends to get to go home is if you have defeated the vampire prince.
Yeah.
So it's basically, you've got this race against time, and if you fail the race, if you don't make it, right, you're all 13. It's just here's another surprise boss fight to get you home and get to the end of the game.
Yeah. And also, defeating Dragul allows you to really not just escape Yeld, but also to save it from its evil tyrant that's ruling it, and
Heroes of the
to
land.
save the people that live there. Yeah,
Right.
but on the flip side, you might decide that the prince is not the bad guy. You might decide that he's actually, kind of okay, and instead of escaping Yeld, you want to stay in Yeld and work with him and become the rulers of Yeld. So your path isn't set in stone. We give you a structure and a direction to go in, but you get to choose your own adventures, and you get to make the story of Yeld your own.
Awesome. Very good question, though, since you're talking a bit about a few of the elements of the game. What is the general flavor and influences of what the setting is like? What can people expect upon reading it? What kind of feeling?
Oh, wow. Well, for me, Nick and I are brothers, and I'm several years older than Nick, so we have slightly different influences here, I think. I know we both wanted to make something that felt a little bit like a Studio Ghibli film, but also like an old school RPG like Final Fantasy Tactics or The Legend of Zelda, but also something that had like the influence of episodic shows like we were talking about, like Inuyasha and Avatar and shows like that.
Perhaps a show that there's a magical door in the middle of a roller coaster that might feature large fire-breathing 5-headed lizards, as well as underground places that monsters would congregate.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm a big fan of through the door stories, whether that's Alice in Wonderland or Inuyasha or Narnia. I'm a huge fan of that kind of escapism of let's go to this other world and explore it and save it or become part of it. That's always been super interesting and super vital to me.
And what about you, Nick? What were your influences in putting into this game?
Oh, certainly a lot of that. I mean, so much of what I grew up with was, hand-me-downs from my siblings, including Jake. So, watching the cartoons that they showed to me and, watching the anime and reading comics and books that are definitely stories just like that, right? And I'm a huge fan of young adult novels. I think there's, great stories to be told about, kids growing up and learning how to become adults in dangerous circumstances like that. And of course, video games are a huge influence for us. I remember being very young and watching Jake play things like Secret of Mana, which I feel like is a huge influence on
God,
things
yeah,
I
Secret of Mana.
And
because Yeld is kind of Secret of Mana, the role playing game.
Heavily influenced by video games and comic books, American and otherwise.
Awesome.
Certainly a lot of cartoons of the '90s.
Yeah.
As a question to you guys, because obviously I've got a little bit of a sneak into the book, having you guys sent me a PDF copy, which is wonderful.
Thank you,
but what sort of you could say, oh, our inspirations are these and all. What sort of monsters, interesting and unique monsters that you might not find in that game that I referenced just a minute ago?
Okay. Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff we've got here. Let me. I can just open the book and randomly find something that's weird and different.
I mean, one of the things we definitely wanted to do was we didn't want to just use stock monsters. We didn't want to go through the Dungeons and Dragons monster manual and go, well, here's our version of this and here's our version of that. But at the same time, we love games like old games like Dragon Warrior and Legend of Zelda that have their own neat, weird monsters. So we tried to, there's some classics in here. You definitely get, some mermaids and some giant spiders and stuff like that, but we tried to give it our own flavor. For example, in the game, animals talk in Yeld, and animals are part of Yeld society. And one of the factions of animals is the spiders, and the spiders range from tiny little spider size to huge creatures that are the size of houses. And sometimes they are really, they're part of cities, they're part of towns, they're part of communities. One of the monsters that's in here is a spider judge, and when you fight him, what he does is he puts on a trial, and he decides whether you're guilty, and then he prosecutes you to the full extent of the law. But other spiders are burglars or thieves or muggers. Some of them are assassins. So there's lots of weird stuff like that. We also went out of our way to just try to kind of create some weird monsters. Like we have a spelling bee that casts spells on people. We have a bean whale, which is a giant, weird water elemental whale. We have all kinds of weird stuff, and we like the weirdness, and we like a kind of a combination of cute and sinister.
Mm-hmm. Well, I actually would love for you guys to give the stat line and some information about the mermaid, because if they watch our previous actual plays, both of them will have mermaids featured as major villains. So if you can give us a physical description and some information that they might get a glimpse into, that'd be great.
Sure. I'm just going to keep going here. Sure. Mermaids are also the villains in our new starter set, which is called Mermaid Hunters. And the idea there is, as you discover the door to Yeld, you meet a local who mistakes you for a group of mermaid hunters and sends you after this gang of vicious mermaids who have moved into town and have tried to take over town and commit crimes and just be generally awful. And the mermaids in Yeld are kind of similar to mermaids you might see in other fiction. They certainly look the same. They are women who have hair and hands and pointy ears and fishtails, of course, but they can also use magic to turn their fishtails into legs, and they can run around on land and commit crimes and just be giant jerks. And they're tough and they're strong, and because they come from the ocean and they come and they were created as soldiers by this entity called the Deep, who is at war with the Prince of Yeld. They have a military history, and they're a history of being kind of corsairs and assassins and thieves and spies. So they're really tough and vicious.
So it sounds like rather than the modern version of mermaids that a lot of people associate with pop culture, similar to a lot of pop culture now associates glitter with vampires, you're going back
Right.
a couple ages older and going towards more the sirens version of mermaids, where they have that insidious nature to them within them, so they can bring you into danger and such like that.
Yeah, that's
Certainly.
actually true.
One,
Go ahead.
such a big influence in Yeld is everything is a monster, and this is represented by the fact that everything has monstrous tendencies here. And even though this mermaid might be friendly now to you, it is a monster, and everything you're going to deal with is a monster, and that comes with danger, and that comes with sort of this background darkness to the whole thing, that you're all being afflicted by something.
Yeah, so even though, for example, in some parts of Yeld, mermaids are just part of society, you might go to towns where mermaids live, and there's a mermaid who's a mayor, and there's a mermaids that are running the fishing industry and stuff like that. They also have a tendency to, settle their arguments by drowning people. And that's going to be true of everybody you meet in Yeld. Everybody, like Nick said, is a little bit of a monster, whether they're one of the fairies who are not cute little flying things, but instead they're like 9-foot tall furry monsters that eat people. Sometimes they're really polite, and sometimes they're ready to rip your arms off. And that's true of, the goblins and the tooth facers and all of the animal tribes and pretty much everybody else you meet in Yeld. You never know if you're going to get somebody who's violent and belligerent or somebody who's willing to help you out.
Just like the real world, and
like the real world.
So one of the real monsters are us.
Well, yeah, I mean, it might be a little cliched, but one of the things we like to say about Yeld is everything's a monster, but everything's also a person, and how they is always complicated and complex, and maybe they are evil, but there's probably a reason for that, and maybe they're not evil, but they're hostile, and there's probably a reason for that as well. And that's something you get to explore as you play through Yeld. You get to make friends with monsters, and there's always a way to try to make friends with monsters. You don't have to stab everything you meet. Sometimes the best solution is befriending something or intimidating something or trying to end a fight by running away or getting somebody else to run away instead. Making friends, making enemies, discovering who can be your friend and who can be your enemy is a big part of the Yeld experience.
I think that's actually a very important point there. A big part of combat in Yeld, and just in general, is the idea that you never have to finish a fight by killing anything. If you ever played something like Undertale, the idea is that there's always a way to do something without it just being violence, right? And so we have several mechanics that are built around this idea of, how do we deal with conflicts? How do we end fights without, killing a monster? And of course, because of how this works, there are consequences to killing things. When you're going around and you're just a group of people, murdering every monster you see, you start generating ghosts, and ghosts are, angry, and they will affect you guys if you can't, find a way how to either deal with the ghost or stop, murdering everything, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, because you were saying that we want to reemphasize that this game is really designed for parents and to be able to play with their kids. This is something that is family oriented and specifically very welcoming to kids. And in kids cartoons, you don't go around killing people. You defeat the villain in the superhero TV shows like Young Justice, even though that's not really a kids show in truth. But
Sure.
In DuckTales, you defeat the villain, you trick them. In Miraculous Ladybug, you take their miraculous and make them whole again and human. And so in kids cartoons, in X-Men, they defeat the villain. They're never killing the villain, and that's a good point to that, because this way you're not having to introduce that element to your children.
Are you just trying to shame my dog for killing somebody during a cooking competition? I mean, we were able to bring them back.
You didn't actually kill him, because he was like one of those nightmare
the tooth-facers.
Yeah, the tooth-facers, but he's that bug sap, which is like a creature out of Nightmare Before Christmas.
Exactly like that.
And
No, it's interesting because we wanted to leave the mortality on the table as well. We wanted to look like at something like Princess Mononoke, for example, where death does happen and killing does happen, and there's a weight to it. Killing is a choice that your character makes. Causing harm is a choice that your character makes, and there's always consequences to that, and you have to consider it. And you may go down that path. And when you go down that path, we want it to feel like you're making a conscious choice. If you're a younger player and you decide that you are going to take your dagger and actually kill that monster, we want there to be weight to it and consequences to it. We don't want it to just feel like it's a murder simulator. We want you to feel like you are making a conscious choice, and then you have to live with and experience the consequences for that. And then, of course, like we said, we want there to be an alternative where you can choose not to go down that path at all.
awesome.
Yeah, I think there's a friendly version of this for children, and then there's a more complex version for adults to sort of look into the morality of all of it and play with that a bit.
And also, there's definitely an age group as you get a little older. As a child, what you want is things that you don't want things that cater to being a kid. You want things that give you a taste of being an adult and are a little more complicated and are a little more morally ambiguous, or not just morally ambiguous, but morally expansive. Avatar: The Last Airbender is a great example where the characters really have to make choices throughout the series. And it's not always a choice of, do we hurt somebody or not hurt somebody, but do we do this thing that's easy for us but is going to have consequences for the world, or do we do the hard thing that's going to make the world better? And I think there are some kids that really respond to that because they want to move into larger and more complex stories where their characters' actions actually mean something, and it's not just about making easy choices. It's about making complicated choices that matter.
I think
that's something that a lot of us as gamer adults like too in stories.
Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons why kids really love role-playing. I mean, a lot of kids don't get a chance to experience role-playing games. Instead, they see their parents or their older siblings playing role-playing games, and they think, oh, I want to do that too. But they have to graduate into that years later. Like, they don't get to play D&D until they're like 13 or 14, or they don't get to try out Vampire until they're in high school or college. There's not a lot of easy paths for kids to get into role-playing games at a young age.
Yeah, Alice and I, early on in our relationship, we were gaming with a guy, and he, had a young son, and I'm going to say he's like 8 years old. And so when he was divorced from his wife that the son was from, and so on the weekends the son was there, we had him at our table, and awesome. he was there. We, by all means, this was 2nd edition D&D,
okay,
which makes me realize how old the kid is now. And he had a great time. We hooked him up with a fighter character and go with us and have an awesome time. And they'll respond to it. Maybe the young kids aren't going to play a super complex character in a game like D&D where you're going through all the spells, but they're going to have a great time. And in Yeld, you've got that they can be whatever they want. Because hitting something with a sword or using your magic is using basically that exact same system. And
right.
And I think that's awesome because it's whatever they think is going to be an interesting character.
And at the same time, what I really love about Yeld is it does scale up to adult play because there is actually a level of complexity built within the system that is actually lost in a lot of the newer light mechanic systems, light crunch systems. And I'm someone who needs a system to bite and sink my teeth into to really be able to enjoy a game long term. In your game, I'm definitely getting to that point because there is that complexity of the chains and then the manipulation of the scenarios where you're taking your abilities and you're really trying to trick them out. I think there's a fair amount of complexity that adults can really get into that is actually more complex than some of these light systems that are currently out there.
Well, thanks. We definitely wanted to build something that part of our design philosophy is you have a very simple front end that's easy to approach, and then a complex back end that you can dig into as much as you want to. And that's where stuff like the action chain and all the options come into. Nick, let's talk about the action chain in combat a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the big influences, and that's made clear by the action chain and how combat works, is video games. And there are a lot of mechanics within this that are very similar to how you would play it out in a video game. One thing we had talked about before we started was the concept that food items are going to supply you with a one-time bonus to a roll. And when you want to use that in a combat, it's just like pausing the video game, opening up your item menu, eating the food item, and then all of a sudden, bam, you're back fighting and getting done what you need to get done. So there are some very fun and video game-esque mechanics to this. We use an 8x8 grid to represent the board and where you fight. And it's very important that it's an 8x8. We don't want you in this huge space or this small space. Just something right in the middle, very easy to understand, but the complexity of kind of looking at it like it's a chessboard and saying, oh, I need to move here, or I need to, save my action for later and do something else, or I need to do something that's going to help the action chain, which is such an important part of our combat system. And the action chain is a cumulative bonus that you provide to your friends as they take actions after you. Right. So if you have successfully done something, let's say you go up and you punch a monster in the face and you're successful at it, and next you choose your friend to go, and that friend is going to now get a bonus to their roll, whatever they want to do. If they also want to punch that monster, they're going to cast a spell, whatever, they get a bonus, and then that bonus continues on as long as you and your other friends are going one after another and you all succeed at your actions. And this is a very important part of how Yeld works and how combat works in Yeld. And it is definitely a fun thing to see a group of players sitting around the table going, oh, okay, so who should go next? Oh, you should go next because you're going to get this bonus. And if I get, 2 extra dice on my roll, I'll be able to cast this super spell that I normally can't cast. And just seeing everybody, strategize and really put together an awesome round of combat is a lot of fun.
It makes interacting with monsters really neat as well, because monsters have the ability to break this chain. When combat starts, the person who started combat always goes first, and then initiative is determined by that person choosing who goes next, and then the person they choosing who goes next. And you can choose anybody who hasn't gone, whether that's one of the friends or one of the monsters as well. But monsters have the ability to interrupt the action chain by saying, "Excuse me," which is very polite. And if they manage to interrupt, they break your action chain. So that's a real strategy. And because of that, that makes choosing who you want to have go next really important. Sometimes what you want to do is you want to choose a monster to go next so it doesn't have an opportunity to break your chain later. Sometimes you want to choose your friend so they have an opportunity to do an action that will be successful so they can choose another friend, and so on and so on. You also have to be really careful because monsters can build action chains of their own. And what you don't want to do is choose all your friends to go first and then let the monsters build up their giant action chain after that. So there's a lot of choice, there's a lot of strategy.
And that's something that I've seen because the first game that I really played that I think that they were using this was the Marvel Heroic by Margaret Weis Productions, which I love as a role-playing game. And it was like whoever it makes sense for to start the scene is going to be the one with the first action. If a character says, "I throw Mjolnir," this is obviously the start of our action scene, and so that person would be in charge. But then you've got that same passing mechanic, and so often I see groups, even after they've played it a few times, they will just keep, as soon as one of them gets it, they will just keep passing to all the players and then not realizing that means that the enemies now get 2 turns right in a row effectively. And by use of the action chain that this can build, and so you want to avoid the opponents building it, it's some sort of encouragement not to do that and to realize that there is a benefit to not just going, I'm going to do everything now.
Earlier I mentioned... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I've had experiences running the game where we'll find a group of players who will do that. They will go one after another, building up their action chain, making it, these powerful combos. And so as a GM, you got to look at, the group and how they choose to interact with that and build some monsters that will completely destroy that strategy. Build monsters that are brave enough to say, "Excuse me," and take away their ability to do that, or to build off of their own action chain. And all of a sudden, I have 3 monsters on the board that are going to go one after another, and they're going to be doing things that, the players just can't handle with their current strategy. So as a GM, being able to just really mix it up so the players are constantly on their toes is, I think, a very fun part of the system.
Yeah.
Earlier I mentioned that I'm a really lazy GM, and sorry, I just started talking right over the top
Please go
of you.
ahead.
Okay, thanks. I mentioned that I'm a really lazy GM, and one of the things that I love about the system we've made is that the complexity, the possibility for complexities are built right into combat. So even if I haven't really prepared anything as a GM, even if I haven't created a bunch of custom monsters or created a very detailed adventure to play out, combat itself can unfold in such a dynamic way that even a simple set of random monsters that I pull right out of our monster section can be a huge challenge just by manipulating the action chain and moving around on the action board and taking simple actions to really screw with the players or do things that are going to annoy the players or set them back in a lot of ways. And because of that, combat is really dynamic and you never quite know what to expect, and there's always a lot of different options.
I definitely am going to agree with that, having played with you guys for about 6 hours, I think is what our total sessions have been. And, I definitely want, like I told you, I'm going to get buy the book off you guys next time, so I've got my physical copy.
Sure.
And I think that that's really true. It does. Character creation's a lot of fun because of the choices that you get to make. Combat was a lot of fun because of the choices that are there. And different characters feel very differently. In the scenario that we were referencing earlier, where we were in kind of the cage match Iron Chef battle.
Gladiator Iron Chef.
Alice was flying and cooking for us because of stuff that she's like, well, witches have this, witches have that, which was awesome because none of the rest of us and none of our opponents could fly. Our rogue was a soul thief, I think is the correct title.
That's right.
Was running over, grabbing stuff, and then disappearing because that was something that they could do, and setting it up so they could specifically do that. And then I had set myself more up as a tank, and so I was kind of going over and trying to get heat off of the soul thief or also get stuff and just make people attack me while not being successful. And so each of us, with a simple, a simple concept of how the game should play, we're able to go out, do different things, bring about success, and it was just wonderful. Find a plan, achieve the plan.
Yeah, be very, very different as well at the time, and it was just very cool to have that experience. And speaking of the character creation being simple, being very individual and fun, it is still simple enough to get someone in 30 seconds. It's really easy to walk them through a very quick character creation. So,
well, thanks.
Well, I'm glad we had such a diverse time being able to play through combat, especially because I didn't even really have a chance to even touch on any of how ghosts work in combat. None of you ever died, so it was never really an issue to explore any of the intricacies of how ghosts interact with combat as well, because just because you're dead does not put you out of the fight at all or remove you from playing the game. That's really important. We never want a player to feel like they're not allowed to do something or that their character has been removed in some way.
Kids
even
would
with all
lose
the
interest
things
real fast if they were like, you're out for a while.
That's a big problem.
So even with what we were able to do with that combat, we didn't even get to really scratch the entire full surface of everything it involved. So there's lots more to explore there.
I was smart enough to stay in the air and cry a lot. So I didn't die. I almost did, but I cried a lot and stayed in the air.
You guys had a really solid plan for how it worked out, and each of you was able to cleverly use a mechanic provided by your job to take on a certain task that made everything work really well for you guys.
Let's talk about death real quick and then move on to jobs. One of the things that happens is we didn't want to create a game where your character's constantly dying and then you're making new characters. Instead, we want you to stick with your same character throughout your adventures. So when your character dies, they become a ghost, and this is unique to you because you are heroes in the realm of Yeld. Death cannot hold on to you. So instead, you become a ghost and you are knocked into the ghost world where you are floating around and everything is very dark and very scary, and there might be other ghosts there that you have to fight. And your goal, once you get into the ghost world, is to find a way back to your body, which you do by making a certain test and forcing your ghost back into your body. But while you're a ghost, you can do all kinds of fun stuff. If your friends are in the middle of a fight, you can help them out by scaring the enemies or providing ghost bonuses to your friends. You can also fight other ghosts that might be there. You can search for ghost treasure. There's a a special merchant called the Ghost Merchant that sells all kinds of neat stuff that you can only visit while you're dead. So what we find a lot of times when we're playing Yeld is that players actually want to become ghosts so they can do all kinds of neat stuff. There's also plenty of monsters that are ghosts. So like there's boss monsters that you can only fight when you're a ghost, which is pretty cool. So much
you
like
saying that makes me think that one of the keys is hidden in the spirit world.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's a really neat dichotomy. I think everybody might remember the Legend of Zelda games where you flip over to the Dark World eventually. We wanted to do something like that. And eventually, relatively easy, you can come back to your body and resurrect yourself. So your characters never really die, and they have the ability to suck their souls back in and come back to life, which is another layer of combat that you get to play with.
So that is a good question, though. Brandon brings up a interesting question. Do the GMs decide if there's a key hidden in the Shadow World or the Ghost World, or is it basically you guys have some information set out for where each key is?
So what we did was we went ahead and we wrote an adventure for each one of the hunters, right? If you want to, you can just read right from the book as a GM and be like, okay, here's the adventure, here's the fight, here's the boss. This is how you go through it and get your key for each one of them. But we also write, because people might play multiple times or have completely other ideas, that if you want to, you should just create your own Hunters of Yeld, right? These keys, all you know is that the key belongs to, hunters, and you need to find that hunter and get their key. And if that is represented by, maybe that hunter is dead and they happen to be in the ghost world, then that's awesome, right? It's totally up to the players and how they want to do it. And again, it's very much, we have, for a less proactive GM, we have, all this stuff written down. You can just read it through the book and do the adventure from there. Or if you're more interested in doing your own thing, there's plenty of rules for writing that out and making your own hunters and assembling your own special adventures for collecting the keys.
And what we discover is that very, very often players will do a combination. Like for some of the Hunters of Yeld, they'll say, we want to face these specific ones from the books. But in other cases, they want to come up with their own ideas and they want to create their own stuff. And that's great. That's an exciting part of Yeld that you just like any other role-playing game, you get to make the world and shape the world in your own image. So yeah, you can totally have tons of adventures in the ghost world where the friends have to find ways to become ghosts and then hunt down secret stuff and hidden chests and stuff like that, which is also a very video gamey thing.
Oh yes, I was just thinking about that. That, because you have to, in certain video games, you have to go find the exact place that you're supposed to die to get into this, other room or something.
Well, it
exactly.
goes back to, I think of myself being, really young, playing like World of Warcraft in like 2003, 2004, whatever that time was. And sort of, you die and you have to take that long journey back to your body as a ghost, and sort of looking at the ghost world and seeing that it's just like the regular world, except the colors are different, the sounds are different, it feels really empty and scary. And I always love that sort of concept in a video game.
Yeah, there's very few things in Yeld that you can't draw a direct line back to a video game. Almost everything is inspired by a video game in some way or the other.
That's awesome.
And some of it's really blatant. Like, for example, for our jobs, one of the jobs is Black Mage and one of the jobs is White Mage. And of course, those are directly from Final Fantasy.
Exactly.
Yes.
Speaking of jobs.
Yeah, let's talk about those.
Works is when you first start playing the game, you are a child, so you choose a friend type. We call our characters friends because they're all friends. They're all kids who come from the same neighborhood, and you choose a friend type, and the friend types are stuff like bully or best friend. Best friend's not one. Bully or rival or brat or princess or big sister, stuff like that. Dog is one of them, or baby.
Dog can't talk in the real world, but can in Yeld. That's an important note.
Yeah. That's an important note. And dog has all kinds. Each one of these friend types has their own small rules, but mostly they're starting points. We want you to choose one and then grow beyond it. Like, you're not going to be a bully forever. You're not going to be a brat forever. You're going to grow and mature through your adventures in Yeld.
Well, maybe Preston will be a liar forever.
Sure.
True story. Because Preston didn't show up anymore.
And one of the things each friend type has is a rule called Just Remember, which is a role-playing cue. For example, the rivals, just remember, if you choose to play the rival, your Just Remember phrase is anything you can do, I can do better. And that's a role-playing aid that kind of helps you remember who your character is and what to do if you're not sure what else to do. So as you discover Yeld and as you explore Yeld, you'll start gaining, you'll find gear like weapons and armor, and you'll find special dice, which are things like break and karate chop and climb that allow you to do specific things. And once the door closes, that's when you get to choose your heroic job. So this is like character creation part 2. Now you choose like a really cool job like Oathbreaker, which is a giant tank, or Black Mage, which casts evil spells, or Witch, who flies around on a broom and does curses, or Witch Hunter, who hunts witches. You choose one of those jobs, and that's who you are in Yeld. You are a hero who has taken on this identity and taken on these responsibilities, even though you're a little kid and you don't fully understand what that is. And that comes with a huge power-up. You gain more strong dice or more smart dice, and you gain a bunch of special dice, and all of a sudden you have these weapons you can use, and you have these powers you can use. Oh, go ahead.
It actually brings up a really good point I'd love you guys to cover, or I can. The fact that skills are limited in the sense that skills are feats, like if you play D&D, they are the equivalent of feats. So cooking is a skill/feat, but it's also a power that allows you to go beyond, take it beyond that. And that's an aspect that I really liked and was hoping one of you could cover a little bit more.
Yeah. Nick, do you want to?
Yeah, so basically how it works is that when you want to experience or level up, I'm trying to think of a good term for that for your character, you will buy something called special dice. And these special dice represent just anything you could possibly do under the sun, right? And so sometimes these things are, like was mentioned, cooking is one of them. And cooking is something very specific. When you look at it in the rule book, it allows you to produce food items, which can, of course, like we said, use before, like pausing the menu, eating it really quick, and then getting a bonus. But also, sometimes you'll face challenges that have nothing to do with creating these food items that are just about cooking. And so you'll need to be able to use those dice there as well. And so sometimes you'll find that these special dice are stuff like, it might be climb, and it's just, add these dice when you're climbing. And then other special dice are much more complex ideas. Some of them are more combat focused, some of them are less combat focused, but there's a huge variation in how they work and what they do. But we have some codifiers to make that a little simpler when you're putting it together and figuring out how things work.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And to make it easier on like little kids, once again, the gear system works on a similar level. So they don't have to learn a bunch of microsystems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you
Go
find
ahead.
your first sword, for example, your sword, as long as you're holding it, is going to give you an extra strong dice and an extra brave dice, and those are the stats that your character has. So now, if your character had 2 strong dice and 2 brave dice, as long as they're holding a sword, they'll have 3 strong dice and 3 brave dice. But also a sword might give you extra special dice as well. Like the sword might have the break special dice, and that's a die you can add to any fighting roll in order to break armor or to break down doors and stuff like that. Or the sword might have something more benign like jump, like it might be a rabbit sword. And every time you're holding it, you can jump further, and you can add a jump dice to any strong roll you make in order to jump. Or it might be like a cooking sword. What it might be is like an actual, like a carving knife, like a giant carving knife. So it gives you 1 extra die every time. Yeah.
Yeah,
Or a meat
exactly.
cleaver. That's even better. Actually, I think we have a meat cleaver in the book. And so when you hold it, you're always going to roll extra cooking dice. And that's not going to be handy in every situation. But what we want you to do is we want you to collect a lot of different weapons and a lot of different items and use them in all kinds of situations. If you remember the Legend of Zelda games, Link always has, different items for different situations, and we want that kind of collection. We think that's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the game is that, they're kids from the modern world, and that you said one thing that you liked was that they would identify with these different video games when they first come over and see how different aspects of their world line up here through that lens of video games.
And yeah, they
Oh,
bring
yeah.
they bring this very alien belief and thought to this world. And something that we were talking about before we went on air today was Changeling. We were doing a recording for Changeling earlier. There are certainly some Changeling aspects to it, because the child from the modern world comes into this world and creates a job called witch, which is like the Halloween witch of the black hat, green skin, wart with a broomstick and a cauldron kind of witch.
Yeah.
And that is a completely foreign concept to Yeld. But because they have this belief from Halloween and trick-or-treating, they actually create and empower the class and create this role and stature within the society of Yeld. And there are other elements like that in this world where we bring our foreign concepts into Yeld and give it power by allowing people to see it.
Yeah, ninjas are a good example. Kids love ninjas, but Yeld doesn't have ninjas.
Let's not restrict it to kids.
like Yeld doesn't
Adults
have a
like
tradition
ninjas,
of
lots of them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, nobody in Yeld knows what the word ninja means, but the kids, because they're from our world, they're always running around and they're always like, "Oh, that's a cool ninja sword," and the people in Yeld will be like, "What? We don't know what that means," or they'll say, "Ah, ninja stars," and nobody will know what that means. But slowly, as the kids become heroes and they travel around in Yeld and they spend all this time talking about ninjas, ninjas are becoming like this legendary thing in Yeld, and so there's several items in the book that are like ninja knee pads or ninja weapons, and that's totally influenced by your characters coming into Yeld and spreading these legends.
There's a lot of different elements that are like that. I know there's also the witch hunter class, the job, witch hunter job, which is very much comes from the Western real world movies and TV shows of witch hunters, because there's the whole, enemy on the stake kind of aspect to it, and putting down. So, but it's again bringing something from our modern world to empower this Narnian and Ghibli kind of world crossed with video games and like Final Fantasy and such.
Well, another thing you'll find flipping through the book and sort of reading through the item descriptions and monster descriptions and some of the other flavor of the game is that we purposely wrote a lot of this as if it were being written down by children, right? The way they choose to describe items, the way that they talk about monsters is written in a way that it is as if it was seen through the eyes of these kids. When you come across
That's true. Yeah. When you have a big project like this, sometimes you miss stuff.
Yeah. No, actually, I was just going to say, don't worry about the typos and the need for errata, because that's just because a kid wrote it.
Sure.
It's flavor.
But there's lots of examples of, for example, the skeletons you fight, they're referred to as skelematons, which is just, the idea that a child would come up with a silly name for it, or something along those lines.
Well, in a recent superhero game, I had them fighting these tentacles, and so I named them Tentakills. And
totally. That's exactly
same kind of concept.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of fun to be had there. And I think it helps people get into the right mindset of thinking like a kid and having, sort of a silly name for everything.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So how do you switch jobs?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so as you progress through the game, as you leave rank 1, which is where you get your job, and you enter rank 2, which is a little further into the game, you're going to have the option of switching your job if you want to. So you can visit the job trainer, who is an NPC that lives in the towns, and you can say, I don't like my job anymore. I want a new job. And you pay some reward dice, and reward dice are the things that you earn by completing adventures. You pay some reward dice. And that allows you to switch from, for example, black mage to white mage, or, black mage to witch hunter or freelancer or something like that. And when you switch your job, what you do is you replace all your job benefits with the benefits of a new job. But what you get to keep are any of the special dice you earned while you were in that job. Each job has its own list of special dice that you can only get while you're in that job, but you can take those with you to other jobs. So sometimes what you want to do is you want to dip into a new job, grab a few special dice that are really cool, and then go to a different job so you can build really cool combos. Rank 2 is you have the opportunity to unlock advanced jobs. And advanced jobs are like prestige classes in Dungeons and Dragons. They are powerful. They are powerful but very focused jobs that Junk Hound and Drudge Angel and Boulder Knight, stuff that really allow you to focus on one aspect of Yeld, whether that is being the best tank you can be, or whether that is bringing people back from the dead, or maybe that's building crazy contraptions. And you can unlock those jobs by going on adventures, and once you unlock them, anybody in your group can then go into one of those jobs. Now, you can switch jobs as many times as you like, but eventually, when your character turns 13, you are going to be forced to take on a monster job. And a monster job is when your character becomes a monster, when their body physically transforms into a werewolf or a vampire or a deep mage, which is a kind of an aquatic mage that has a giant squid on their head, or another monster. And at that point, you're going to become a powerful monster, but you're going to be locked into that job, and you're going to have monstrous tendencies, and it's going to make it harder for your group to complete their goals, but in interesting ways. For example, werewolves always have the risk of really hulking out and attacking their friends, whereas a serpent oracle can never. Nick, what am I trying to say?
Never tell their friends the truth. The serpent oracle.
Yeah.
So how it works is that each one of these monster jobs basically comes with a drawback, right? Each one of these has a punishment for being a monster, but it works and integrates into the mechanics of how they're supposed to function and the cool things that they can do while still being a monster. For example, like we said before, the werewolf has this ability to, hulk out into this big monster, and you are, stronger and tougher than most things. But every round that you're this monster, you're going to lose smart dice. And then once you don't have any smart dice, you just attack things randomly, right?
Yeah.
The vampire needs to drink blood. The serpent oracle can't tell the truth and is constantly trapped with the knowledge of the future while not being able to change it. So each one comes with this, sort of drawback to how you have to play them.
And it's important to note that this does not make them the bad guy. Once again, the world itself is about the monster. It's all about all these monstrous species. So it's a bit like World of Darkness, where you can, where the life of it can be about that overcoming and trying to work around it and deal with that drawback and still be the hero. So it doesn't make you just a bad guy or a good guy necessarily.
It is actually kind of a heavy-handed metaphor for puberty. You turn 13 and you become this monster, and you have younger friends who haven't gone through this yet, and they don't understand, and then what they see is really scary. And you're trying to deal with this, and maybe it's changing you in a bad way. Like maybe you are becoming this thing that you don't want to be and you don't understand it, but also maybe you're reveling in it. Like maybe you really like being a vampire. Like maybe that's really exciting. Or maybe you really like being, a hunter in darkness, and you like being in the woods, and you don't really want to go into towns anymore. And all your friends are talking about how, they're really close to being able to finally leave Yeld, and you're thinking, but I like being a monster. I don't want to leave Yeld. This is great. So, you have that choice. You have that choice of how you're going to react to becoming a monster and what you're going to do with it.
Flirting with good and evil is something that we have a little bit of in the main book. We talk about the concepts of gaining things called good and evil dice. Mm-hmm. And these are essentially provided through role-playing, right? And it's okay, if you have someone who is a little more evil, right? You have a black mage who clearly has, a penchant for zapping people when she shouldn't, that kind of thing. So we have some mechanics for, friends who want to be a little more dangerous and wicked than friends who are much more interested in, being the perfect heroes.
Right.
And we expand on this quite a bit in our first expansion book, which is called Towns and Territories. And that takes a much more in-depth look into how good and evil works mechanically and how you can use that to influence towns and cities in Yeld.
Yeah, and Towns and Territories is neat because it's very much about playing smaller games where instead of trying to save the world, what you're trying to do is develop this town and do kind of Harvest Moon style stuff of taking on town adventures and helping out townsfolk and trying to decide if you're going to be the local hero or if you're going to join the crime syndicate and be like notorious outlaws.
Yeah, the fight we had in our last game there, where we did the cooking competition, is actually one of the adventures that we talk about in Towns and Territories as something that happens in towns that you can participate in.
Awesome. That's
Well,
we
that
had
was
a
an
lot of
awesome
fun.
fight.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun with that one. As Brandon keeps telling people, we had more fun than was legal in his opinion.
Oh,
I think it's more fun than strictly legal. Yep.
Yes.
I think it's a lot of fun to provide different ways to play the game. So you can definitely play Yeld as a kind of an epic quest to find your way home, and that's what we present in the main book. But Towns and Territories gives you the option of playing more of a Harvest Moon style Yeld, which we think is a lot of fun.
Oh my God, you guys are going to make me get more of your books. Excellent salesman.
Yes.
Right there.
Yeah. And the starter set that we're releasing, Mermaid Hunters, is really focused on the initial experience in Yeld. We want you to come in and have that amazing first adventure in Yeld where you're discovering this brand new world, this brand new kind of Narnia situation. And you're going into the Lake Town region, which is, a bunch of lakes and a few small towns, and everybody is really friendly. And it seems like this wonderful Studio Ghibli-esque kind of place. But there's these mermaids who are jerks, but they're also more than they seem, and there's a story there. And you get to explore that and go on adventures. And if you want to, you can just keep playing Mermaid Hunters forever. You don't have to close the door and get stuck in Yeld. You can just keep having these nice, wonderful adventures where you go into this nice world and help people out and chase off the mermaids and maybe try to figure out how to deal with a werewolf and stuff like that. And then when you're ready, the main rule book, and you can move on to becoming heroes and starting your quest.
Well, talking about Narnia, the way that the big villain is set up, it's a bit like the White Queen and such. So you're,
sure.
So when you first come in, you have no idea about this White Queen that is causing all this oppression and all this stuff, and so you're like, oh, this is so beautiful, this is so idyllic, and then you start seeing little bits, and so I think that's a nice little ramp up.
Yeah, no, I really love stuff like that. I really love stories like that. That's always exciting and always interesting. That moment in Alice in Wonderland where Alice kind of discovers that going down the rabbit hole is actually weird and dangerous and not really what she thought it was going to be. Mm-hmm. Or that moment in Inuyasha where she realizes that, this is feudal Japan and it's also the past, but there's also these demons and there's all the scary stuff and ghosts, and it's not the idyllic world that she thought it was going to be. Those are always really neat stories in my mind.
Quick aside, because of some of the stuff that you've been talking about, you like. Did you guys ever watch 12 Kingdoms?
Yes. I saw a little bit of it. I never saw much of it, but it's the same kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
You
should definitely watch the whole thing.
It's really enjoyable. I think it's been years since Alice and I watched it, but the first story is excellent, and then it was the second or the third story was another highlight of them, but they were all really good. Some of them take a little while to warm up to, but definitely it's something that, saying that this is what you like.
We're not huge anime fans, but
certainly.
the 12 Kingdoms is definitely one we like. And then there's
that was one that was shown to me that I think probably had an influence on Yeld when I was working on it.
Awesome.
I'm sure.
Awesome. I definitely liked that anime. And then there's another one that I always mix up with 12 Kingdoms, and it's a live action.
The 10th Kingdom.
10th Kingdom.
With John Larroquette.
Yes, I don't know if you guys have seen that, but I highly recommend seeing that as well, because there's also that same influence. The difference is it's that world coming into our world, so it's more like what Modest
Medusa.
Medusa
Well, it's a mix.
Yeah,
and
it's a
so
good
it's
mix,
definitely
actually.
a mix of Modest Medusa and Yeld.
Yes, it's a good mix of the two, so you guys should watch it if you've never watched it.
Yeah, I've never heard of that before.
That I think it's on Prime Video at the moment.
Yeah, 10th Kingdom. It's got John Larroquette. So, but I think that's a pretty good coverage of everything.
I've definitely got one more question
please
here.
do. Please ask.
So, from our live viewers, they have been demanding. They say, but I don't like using these one-time items. And you guys talked about this really intricate food system. Is there any way that I can use food twice? They're demanding to know.
Right.
Okay.
Well, there is actually a very neat little mechanic called Barf. And Barf is a special die that is supplied only to a player who plays the dog friend type. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to consume a food item, use its benefits, throw it back up, and eat it again later to get those benefits again. So there is certainly a way of doing that, and it belongs specifically to the friend who plays the dog.
The best friend.
Brandon loved playing the dog, in case anybody had any doubt about that. He was the best friend to the baby who I played. So.
It's pretty funny. I think there was a short period of time where me and Jake were discussing whether or not we were going to allow anyone to take the bark special die. But I think we made the right choice in keeping it just with the dog.
That's a great choice. That was awesome.
There's certainly other ways to get food very easily. You can make food, you can find food. You're generally going to have a lot of access to food, and so having it be a one-time disposable item isn't really much of an issue. Instead, it makes it kind of more interesting and more fun. You can say, "Oh, today I have sushi, and then tomorrow I have this special cheesecake that we traveled all the way to this town to find." It makes food more of a special event than just like a regular buff.
And just because it is one of my favorite pages in the whole book, I do want to bring up, they have this page with examples of the foods, and there's a berry pie, there's sushi, there's sausage, and there's bacon, and at the end there's a little asterisk for all the little kids who say, "I can't eat any of that," that vegan and alternative options are available.
Yes.
So
awesome. And that's something we hadn't mentioned. I'll mention this really quick. The Yeld rulebook and the Mermaid Hunters set as well is full of instructional comics. We wanted to have a visual way to learn the game, so all the major mechanics of the game are explained through single-page comic strips that you can read and walk away with an understanding of how the rules work.
They work very well for doing that.
Yes, you did a very good job, and the dog is a common narrator for it, teaching you about your special dice.
Right.
So,
well, thanks. I'm glad you were able to enjoy that.
Oh, we did very much. I did very much. Well,
so as just a real quick question, after Mermaid Hunters, what is the future?
That's very.
Are you guys going to come out with the expansion that allows the cat, and so you can bring in evil friends to the group?
All right. So the official stance is that there are no cats in Yeld.
Yay! I mean, boo.
But that doesn't mean that there won't be cats eventually. Cats are interesting animals. We have a few different products planned that we don't want to talk about too much right now, but one of the things we're working on right now is a 2-player version of Yeld that allows one game master to lead one player through an entire adventure or an entire campaign. And so that one player becomes, instead of being one member of a party, they become a character more like Link from the Zelda games, where they are able to face boss monsters on their own and have adventures on their own.
That's awesome.
Very cool. Looking forward to seeing more from you guys.
A question we often get is asking about how to play it in a 2-player setting, and trying to supply a decent way of doing that is what we're looking for.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a big thing for a lot of people. I mean, some folks just bite the bullet and do the 2-player role playing because they don't have the other option. Some people are excellent at setting things up for it, but a lot of people are always looking. I've only got this for my gaming group, and just looking for an option to put out there for that. It's great.
That's what we hear so much. Like we hear we want to try this game, but the only people we know are, like myself or my husband, or myself and my brother, or myself and my girlfriend, or, my
dog.
Friend. Yeah, exactly. So we wanted to make a really fun and compelling single player quest. And we wanted that to be something that was really exciting and fun and that you didn't have to modify yourself.
Well, before we pack it in, though, I do want you guys to plug one more thing, which is the whole reason...
You're dropping out, sweetheart.
Uh-oh.
Is this better?
Much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before we pack this in, though, it sounds like we're winding down, I do have one more thing I would like you guys to plug for our audience real quick, which is the whole inspiration and the source of where Magical Land of Yeld came from with Modest Medusa, because you guys should plug that product a little bit and explain about that.
Oh, sure. Well, all right. So years and years ago, when Nick and I first started working on designing this game, I also started a webcomic called Modest Medusa. And Modest Medusa is about a tiny little monster who comes from a magical world and ends up in our world. She arrives through an enchanted toilet, and she's discovered by a guy and his niece, and they decide to take her in and teach her about video games and junk food and Pokemon and stuff like that. And she loves our world, and she never wants to go home. And D&D. And it wasn't intended to tie in to our Yeld role-playing game, but very, very quickly, like by the 5th or 6th strip, there was suddenly a connection. And the Modest Medusa comic series, which is an ongoing series that you can read every week on modestmedusa.com, became the adventures of this young monster from Yeld who lives in our world and sometimes goes back and forth to Yeld and has adventures with her friends. So it is not exactly the comic book version of our role-playing game, but if you read the comic and you play the role-playing game, you'll see a lot of connections and a lot of crossovers and a lot of reoccurring characters.
You can fight the monsters that show up there, because on flipping through it, I saw a unicorn with a chainsaw for a horn, and I know that's in the game as well.
And links to drive-thrus of copies of the comics as well as the existing products of Yeld, Magical Land of Yeld, will be in the description, so you guys can go and pick up your own copies if this has sold you. And don't forget to back the Kickstarter for their next product. Anything else before I close up for everyone?
Guys, thank you so much for coming. It's been a pleasure as always. I love having you guys on, playing or just talking about Magical Land of Yeld and other things that have brought you guys on your journey thus far. It is always entertaining to me. So I hope to see you guys a lot.
I always love talking to you guys, and this is why we want to game with you more. So.
Well, thanks. This was a lot of fun. Thanks so much for having us.
Well,
yeah, we really appreciate the opportunity to talk about our game and play with you guys.
Yeah, look forward to playing with you more in a variety of games and talking more about gaming with you guys in the long term. So thank you guys for coming on BWK.
And definitely tell us when that's gonna jump. Oh, did you guys want to talk about reward tiers at all?
Oh yeah, before I close up, did you want to?
Oh, yeah. So for our new Kickstarter, we're trying to make it super easy. We're not offering very many reward tiers. Instead, what you can get is you can get the new starter set, Mermaid Hunters, as either a PDF or a box set that includes a little rule book, an action board to play on, some really cool cardboard standees, dice, et cetera, everything you would need in a starter. We also have a bundle that is the main Yeld rulebook plus that starter box, and that's also available digitally as well. And then beyond that, we have a bundle that includes a bunch of monsters and monster standees, so you can have a really nice collection of these really cool thick card tile miniatures that you can use in your Yeld games.
Very important question on this then. Who did the art for all the tokens?
Oh, that's all me. Nick and I kind of split the duties here. We both do some of the writing and some of the creation, but Nick does a lot more of the world building, and I do all the art.
Well, I wanted to make sure that we hit that up for the audience because I did know that you were the artist behind Modest Medusa and Magical Land of Yeld, but that is something they should know, that this is a very hands-on product. You don't outsource anything, and the art is adorable. So
that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
As I flip through the game, before I even played it, I'm like, I want to play this game because the art just pulls you in. Yeah, is there going to be any early birds on this?
We decided not to do that because we wanted to make everything accessible for everyone.
Oh, that's
okay,
awesome.
Cool.
That's really an awesome choice. We look forward to
Kickstarter. I was definitely going to have Alice and I up at the middle of the night hitting the refresh button.
Well, what we do plan on having is several free expansions that are going to be stretch goals. So when we hit different stretch goals, that'll unlock some free content that can be added to the starter kit, and that'll be useful in the main role-playing game as well.
Well, you hear that, everyone? Go back it. So, awesome. Well, then I will sign us off. Bye, everyone.